Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and welcome to part 3 of our exploration of Asian horror films released during 2012. Now we will be taking a look at some interesting, albeit flawed films tonight. My favorite stuff will be saved for part 4, of course. And as always, titles for all the movies I discuss will be listed in the description box below. So let's get rolling here. The first film we are covering tonight is called Another from 2012. This is a Japanese horror film. After a chain of deaths at a junior high school, a new transfer student turns to a mysterious girl who holds the key to the dark mystery. Not long after transferring schools, 15-year-old Koichi collapses and becomes hospitalized. One day, at the elevator in the hospital, Koichi meets a pretty girl wearing a uniform and an eye patch. The girl says something strange and then vanishes in the hospital mortuary. After being discharged from the hospital, Koichi goes to his new school where he encounters the very same girl, who is also in his class. Even more strange is that, all of his classmates and even his teacher act like the girl does not exist. Now this is based on a novel from which a related anime TV series was also produced. I enjoyed the anime, but I'm not in love with it. Most people who may be interested in this live-action film have probably seen the anime already, so I'd like to do a little comparison of the two for your own information. No spoilers, of course. Now, the story is very similar, okay? As you might expect, the mystery elements in this live-action film are a little bit more simplified when compared to the anime, because the anime has more time to develop things, of course. But they're still pretty good. The anime had a better and more violent payoff at the end, with some bloody deaths to enjoy. This film does have a few entertaining death scenes, my favorite of which is probably the sharp wire scene in the forest, but not as many as the anime. There's not as many highlights here. Both the anime and this film do have some pacing issues, I think. That's like a commonality. There are some boring patches in both, where I got a bit restless and just wanted things to move along. So yes, it's deliberately paced stuff, but the concept is interesting, and it's a bit different from what you might expect, because there's a rule system that must be followed that's a little different from what you typically see in films of this type. The anime had quite a bit of style to it. The style of the live-action film is sufficient, with some interesting horror imagery as well. Dreamlike visions, some ceramic dolls, etc. Character interaction and acting does feel a bit hokey at times, but overall it's pretty good. Now our lead actress is Ai Hashimoto, whose first theatrical film was a supporting part in the outstanding 2010 film Confessions. If you have not seen Confessions, you must check that out. But I would say that Another was the first time that I noticed her personally in a lead role. So she's quite good here, and I've grown to be a fan of hers. So here's my advice for this franchise. If you have not seen either the film or the anime, I would suggest watching the anime first, because it's the better of the two. However, I did find the film to be a watchable feat of entertainment, I guess you would call it. Remember, we're still in the watchable fluff piece section of this exploration of Asian horror films from 2012. There are probably 16 Asian horror films from this year that you could watch before checking this one out, but it's not bad. It's not bad at all. But with that said, this is a film that should probably stay on your lower priority list until you hammer out some of the better stuff. Alright, availability of Another. It is available on Region 3 DVD with subtitles. I'm sure you could find it streaming around too. Alright, our next film tonight is a sequel, and that is X Game 2, 2012 again, of course. This is a Japanese horror film. 5 people, which include a female student and a nail artist, find themselves locked up in a classroom by a group of unknown persons. They are forced to compete against one another by playing a game called Class, which is a game of chance for which each round results in one player being tortured in some hideous fashion by either their competitors or a group of assailants fitted with welding helmets. Now, meanwhile, a reporter investigates a rumor involving a vigilante organization that targets bullies. But will he finish his investigation before the deadly contest is over? Now, I reviewed the first X Game film when we covered 2010 in this playlist. That was a surprisingly impressive and ambitious torture film that kind of transcended its subgenre, with a 3-act structure and sufficiently developed motivations for the antagonists. Now, it's definitely one of the best people trapped in a school and forced to play a death game films in recent memory, and Japan has released quite a few of these. Now, X Game 2 begins by ditching the first act structure of its predecessor, instead choosing to throw our protagonist into the situation immediately. It does provide a few flashbacks along the way, but the backstory is less nuanced in this installment. The games begin as kind of a question-answer scenario that involves writing answers on a chalkboard. I found this part to be a bit on the bland side, but the games do become more varied and demented as it progresses. With that said, however, this film does contribute its fair share of cringe-worthy scenes involving torture, of course. One involves calligraphy with a bloody finger, which doesn't sound that bad, but the filmmakers did a very good job of making that look really painful. There are also a few other memorable moments as well, which I won't spoil for you. There are a few creepy images later on as well, which I appreciated. Now, similar to the first X Game flick, performances are sufficient. Nothing too impressive in that regard, but they're decent. Pacing is generally good here as well. So all in all, I think X Game 2 is a pretty good sequel that lacks the more ambitious and interesting elements of its predecessor, but it still proves to be moderately entertaining affair. Now, the availability of X Game 2 is that it is available on YouTube without subtitles, though. I have not been able to find this with subtitles, and I actually was unable to watch it with subs so far. So, but the structure of the film and what it's about, especially if you've seen the first film, you can easily follow the second one without subtitles, I think. All right, our next film tonight, pretty good one, and that is POV, a cursed film, also known as POV Norowareta Firumu. This is from Japan again, of course. We're in 2012 again. Okay, you know the drill with these documentary-style horror films by now. A small group of people take their camcorders and investigate a haunted school or some type of location. In this case, it's a school. This actually begins with two pop idols who are broadcasting their own little variety show, and they watch a creepy video by an anonymous fan that takes place in a school. Now, one of the girls recognizes that the location is her former high school. She seeks out a psychic who assesses that a certain ritual must be performed in order to rid the school and the girls of this phenomena. The director, agents, and the two girls go to the school and find danger waiting for them. So one positive thing right from the start is that this was directed by Norowareta. This is the man who previously directed Premonition from 2004, Ringu Zero from 2000, and Orochi from 2008. So the director here has a handful of good films under his belt. POV can be summarized like this, okay? First, the opening half hour is pretty good. Near the beginning, there are some creepy found footage images that are shown, my favorite of which is the woman on the rooftop who has like a weird, demented giggle that she uses. It was pretty good. The entertainment value then dips a little bit during the middle half hour, which is kind of mediocre. I felt like it was a bit drawn out, and it had some generic filler material and scares. But fortunately, things improve again during the final half hour. There's actually a 15-minute scene that plays after the first set of ending credits, and then another 1-minute scene after the second set of ending credits. So this is like a Marvel film. You gotta watch it all the way through the credits. These extra sequences are actually the best parts of the entire film, and they end it off on a strong note, so it's important that you watch it all. It includes one pretty neat haunting in a movie theater using camera work that's, I don't know, it's pretty interesting and fun to watch. You don't really see camera work used quite like that in a ghost scene. It was pretty cool. There are also a few moments where the sound drops out completely that kind of freaked me out a little bit in this movie. So there are some positives to this for sure. Also, POV seems to have minimal editing and some very long takes, which is impressive from a technical standpoint. Give the filmmakers credit for that. I like it when movies minimize editing because it prevents things from getting jumbled and confusing visually, you know what I mean? Now, one somewhat annoying aspect is that the characters yell and scream a lot, maybe a little bit too much. Not a big gripe, but it's there. Another criticism I would have is that the backstory is very basic. My favorite documentary-style horror films usually develop a complex mythology or a nuanced backstory to the events. For example, Norowareta from 2005. You do not get that here, and I think that limits POV from being an elite found footage horror film. But I do recommend this. It's good. Now, POV, a cursed film, is difficult to find, but it is available on YouTube without subtitles. All right. Next film tonight, another documentary-style one. Japan makes quite a few of these nowadays. And it is called Yami Douga 1, also known as Darkness Video 1. And this is the first one in the franchise, which I've discussed in previous videos on this playlist. It's a documentary-style horror anthology of 5 short films. I covered Yami Douga 3 in part 2 of this video, and gave you an introduction to the series there. It was probably the least impressive of the entire, or of the films released in 2012 at least, from this franchise, but it was still watchable. I'm happy to say that Yami Douga, the first installment, is a bit of an improvement. My reviews of these films are going to be short and sweet because the shorts within them have brief runtimes that could be spoiled with any kind of lengthy discussion. So, story 1. A couple light fireworks in a desolate area at night, but hear a voice from the darkness. This is a good creepy segment. Story 2. While running an errand, a group of friends unknowingly encounter a spirit while parked in their car. A fairly short segment, but it's pretty good. Story 3. 2 men are hired to perform a Shinto grave honoring at night. This shows the details of the Anomali ritual etiquette. It's a particular ritual that is performed. It's pretty interesting to watch. The money shot is creepy and a bit different from what you might expect. The subsequent plot twist is also a bit interesting. Arguably the strongest segment of the bunch in this anthology. Story 4. 2 kids play a board game and a face emerges on camera. This has a short runtime and is fairly weak in my opinion. Probably the weakest segment of the bunch in this anthology. In Story 5, a man records his physical abuse of a pregnant woman. This has some surprisingly gruesome images. Nothing excessive, but it's more gruesome than the typical found footage stuff you'll get from Japan. And also compared to the other films we typically get in this franchise, which rely mostly on creepiness. This is a good segment, though. I liked it. So overall, the brief 64-minute runtime of this anthology keeps pacing going pretty well. There are no jump scares at all, with the emphasis instead on eeriness and tension. I like that, but it's not one of the best of this franchise. Again, I would point you to Yami Douga 12 as a starting point. And I will include links to the Yami Douga YouTube channel, and specifically to Yami Douga 1 in the description box below, because these are available on YouTube with subtitles. You have to pay like $3 to watch it. But again, watch them in the order I tell you. I've said this before, if you want to start with this franchise, you start with Yami Douga 12. They're completely different storylines in all of them, so you don't have to worry about continuity issues if you skip around. Hit the best ones first. Alright. Our next one here, we're changing it up here. We've done Japan, our first 4 films. Now we're gonna move over to China. This is $1 Million Crocodile. Yeah. Also known as Croczilla in America. I think it's streaming under the name Croczilla. So, or maybe it's on DVD. I'll give you the availability in a minute. But you might have to look for it under the term Croczilla, even though it was really released in its home country as $1 Million Crocodile. Chinese horror comedy. Now, this film tells the story of an 8-meter-long crocodile on the rampage in Hangzhou. Zhao befriends a Mao, a 36-foot-long crocodile, who lives on his father's crocodile sanctuary. Soon his father is forced to sell the crocodiles to a gangster who plans to use them for high-priced meals. Now, the story kicks into high gear as the crocodile is released, swallows a fortune won by a local woman, and begins to terrorize the local town, hence the term $1 Million Crocodile. So the plot is similar to your typical Sci-Fi Channel original in the United States, but this film is surprisingly fun to watch, in my opinion. The beast is a nasty bugger, and the CGI is actually pretty decent in how it mimics a real-life crocodile's movements. The croc is given quite a bit of screen time, too, which I was kind of surprised about. It even contributes some suspenseful moments, like the nighttime cabin assault, which could be my favorite sequence in the entire film. Some of the rural environments are nice to look at. They provide a good setting for the mayhem to ensue. I like how the croc lacks the mental capacity to tell the difference between like a good guy and a bad guy, so everyone is basically forced to flee from him at some point in the film, even the good guys. Some of the main characters are likable and given a bit of color. The lead actress is very attractive, in my opinion, but may annoy some viewers because she does kind of whine a lot and complain a lot in the film. I did like the actress, but I think they could have dialed her down a little bit more. Also, the characters do make a few dumb decisions along the way. But still, this is an unexpectedly enjoyable creature feature that, you know, I'll probably watch again at some point in the future. You know, it's a good flick. So, $1 Million Crocodile, also known as Croczilla, is widely available on DVD. And like I said, you could probably find it streaming too. When I was looking for the availability for this, I kept looking for $1 Million Crocodile, and I couldn't find it anywhere. I'm like, what am I missing? And I eventually found out. Croczilla. Alright, we move back to documentary-style horror one final time tonight. And we're back in the Yami Douga franchise. This is Yami Douga 4, also known as Darkness Video 4. Again, Japan is responsible for these. So yet again, this is an anthology of 5 documentary-style recordings. If you haven't figured it out yet, the runtime structure of the films in this franchise are as follows. A longer segment, followed by a shorter segment, followed by a longer segment, followed again by a shorter segment, and then it finishes again on a longer segment. So you have the alternating timelines or time lengths for these short films, and it's a nice change-up. It makes it an easy sit. Another thing you may notice is that the narrator's voice is quite good, I think. And the slow-motion replays provide some freak-out moments. So the first story here concerns a man who, ahead of his marriage, purchases an apartment and brings his friend to videotape the new pad. Basic but creepy segment here with one subtle background image, a good tie-in to a disturbing event, and an eerie finale involving drawings. So this was a good one. The second story, the shorter segment, a parent films her kids at a festival but catches an image of something horrifying. This segment, again, pretty short, but it doesn't contain one good money shot to finish on. The third and the fifth segments are 2 parts of one story, about a woman who investigates her sister who is dating a possible psychic man who is obsessed with spirits. The showcases a nicely creepy scene in a pitch-black apartment that makes good use of flashing lights and shadows. There's also a collection of stalker photos that's quite effective. The fourth story concerns members of a cult who film their murder of a woman in an attempt to appease the evil spirit they worship. They subsequently dismember her hand and use it in a ritual. So the supernatural phenomena are quite different and pretty cool in this segment. So overall, this documentary-style anthology is pretty successful, I think. Not necessarily one of the best in this franchise, but it's definitely a good one. It's a good one. And again, it's available on YouTube with subtitles for a small fee. Alright, we're moving back to mainland China again. This one's pretty cool. I covered this one when I was going through my DVD collection videos, and the DVD of this one is it's tough to find now. As a spoiler for the availability. So I'm really glad I have it in my collection. And that is Haunting Love. This is a horror romance film. Now, this is the story of a radio host who is set to marry in 7 days, but finds out that her fiancé is cheating on her with her friend. Now, before her lover kills himself out of guilt, our protagonist attempts suicide but survives and establishes a link to the supernatural. Afterward, her acquaintances meet some untimely deaths, but can she navigate her way through the mystery and find out who or what is behind these deaths? This is a fairly basic premise, but this film distinguishes itself for a few reasons. First and foremost, it's got some serious style, man. The cinematography is very cool. Lighting is dark but moody. The score is a mix of piano and organ music. All this gives like a very strong gothic vibe that you do not see very often in contemporary horror films, especially Chinese horror films. Haunting Love is arguably the most stylish and visually compelling Asian horror film of 2012. It's like that good visually. And I guess you could say audibly. With regard to the script, it blends horror, romance, and a stalker plot together pretty nicely. It definitely has like a murder mystery vibe that's a bit different from some Japanese or South Korean ghost films that rely more on finding out the origin of the curse. This is more of an Italian giallo feel to it, which I definitely enjoyed. Main characters are properly developed, I thought. I like the lead actress as well. She does a good job. On the negative side, there are a few cheap scare tactics here and there that are peppered throughout. There are also a few too many plot twists, I think, during the latter half that kind of convolute things a little bit too much. But with that said, this is a sharp-looking, enjoyable film. If you want something that's visually compelling, cool to look at, with a pretty good story and characters, this is one to seek out. Now, the DVD is tough to find. I think my DVD was the Malaysian release. So if you could find the Malaysian release out there, it has subtitles and it's all region. You might be okay there. I haven't checked recently. But if not, it is available on YouTube with subtitles. So it's out there for you. Yeah, I like this one. This is one that I like to rewatch. Like every 2 years or so. There's just something about it. You know, I always get in the mood to watch it. You know what I mean? Alright, now our last film tonight, again, we're changing it up for country of origin. We're going to Indonesia. And this is arguably the most impressive overall film that we will be covering tonight. And it is called Modus Anomali, also known as Ritual, from Indonesia, of course. The opening shot of this film shows our protagonist emerging from a shallow grave. He's understandably rattled on an emotional level, as anyone would be waking up in that situation, but he's also suffering from amnesia. Now, stumbling through the forest, he eventually comes upon a small cabin, and after entering, he finds the bloody corpse in a snuff film. This freaks him out, so he attempts to escape the forest, but that proves to be difficult because a violent man seems to be stalking and tormenting him. This is Joko Anwar's film. This guy directed one of the best Asian horror films of the last decade in The Forbidden Door, which I covered in the 2009 section of this playlist. A phenomenal film. So I went into Modus Anomali with very high expectations. Almost impossibly high expectations. And not surprisingly, what I found was that I ended up enjoying this film quite a bit more after a second viewing a few years later. Now, this is a psychological disorienting mystery at its core. The viewer's understanding of the first half is reliant on information that's provided near the end of the film. It's one of those films. And I really think this benefits from rewatch value after you see it, to kind of see how everything plays out. We follow our protagonist as he flees from possible threats and confusingly finds clues to help him figure out what the heck's going on here. The entire film is basically structured to set up the ending, which is very cool, unconventional, and a bit disturbing. The forest environment is effectively atmospheric. I like the use of inanimate objects that initially give the impression that someone's standing in the shadows. You know what I mean? It kind of fakes you out a few times, but they're good fake out moments. Very little dialogue in this. Very little dialogue. This guy's just going around the forest. There's no one to talk to. I mean, there's a few side characters that show up, but very little dialogue, which I liked. There are stretches of time where there's no talking at all. It helps to create a very effective mood, I thought. The dialogue is in English, by the way, so finding subtitles for this is not necessary. Modus Anomaly is probably, as I said, the most well-rounded and effective horror film that I've covered tonight. It's quite impressive, actually, and it's certainly worth seeking out. Joko Anwar, really, somebody's got to release all of his stuff in the US, man. The Forbidden Door is the #1 film. Or close to the #1 film, I would say, from Indonesia that really needs a release bad in the US, from what I've seen. So someone needs to get on that, man. Now, in terms of availability of Modus Anomaly, it's available on YouTube. You can find it there. And again, what minimal dialogue is in it is in English, so you don't have to worry about subtitles. Alright, it was kind of an interesting little collection of films. That concludes part 3 of our journey through Asian horror films released in 2012. As I always say, if any of these titles interest you or are up your alley, try to check them out if you can. And be sure to join me for part 4, which will showcase some of my favorite films, horror films from this year. There's some pretty cool stuff in there. A few of which are rare, but some of them are widely available. So it'll be a nice mix of stuff. And there's definitely some impressive stuff in my top. How many am I covering? 9. My top 9 coming in the next video. So be sure to check that out. And as always, I will see you next time.